They said I was not a good fit. Turns out, I was just not meant to sit quietly. It started with a smile, the kind that feels polite but hollow. Like someone handing you an invitation, then locking the door behind you. That is how this neighborhood works. I moved here 5 years ago. Outside Austin, a place where mailboxes match and silence wears khakis, where nice means not too much. I came here for peace. I thought if I followed the rules, kept my lawn neat, attended the monthly meetings, I would eventually belong. But some places decide who you are before you even finish your sentence. It was not overt. No one shouted, no one slammed a door, they just withheld. The meeting invites that never came. The budget votes held when I was accidentally left off the email. The gardening suggestions, gently rejected. Always gently. Maybe next year. You are wonderful, just not quite the right fit. We want to preserve the tone of the community. I brought cupcakes to the spring picnic, native plants to the gardening board. Smiles to every stranger on the street, and still, nothing. No invitations. No nods of inclusion, just glances that passed through me like I was decoration. At first, I thought it was me. That I needed to soften more, wave faster, laugh louder. But eventually, I stopped trying because it was not about effort, it was about access. And they had already drawn the lines, not because I did something wrong, but because I did not mirror them. And that was the first lesson. I started paying attention, not out of spite. Out of clarity, I read every bylaw, every HOA minute, every financial update tucked in fine print. I saw who really made decisions, who always seconded motions without reading, who showed up to vote, then left before the cleanup. I never raised my voice, I just started keeping record. And one night, while reviewing landscaping proposals, I noticed something off. A vendor name, repeated. Connected, I dug deeper, tied names to invoices to board members, connections to private favors, nothing criminal. But dishonest, I did not say a word, just kept watching. Waiting. Because the thing about exclusion is this, it frees you to stop performing and start preparing. They thought they had sidelined me. What they really did was clear my view. I saw everything. How power moves in silence. How decisions are pre-decided before the meetings start. How fit is often just code for compliance. And I stopped asking to belong. I started becoming the one who could not be ignored. So when the annual HOA elections came around, and 2 board members suddenly stepped down, I submitted my name, quietly. No campaign, no flyers, just facts. And when the votes were counted, I won, not because I was liked, because I knew more than anyone else at the table. Because I read what they skipped, remembered what they forgot, and stayed when they assumed I would leave. Now I sit at the table they once used to gatekeep, and they still smile. But their eyes, different, wary, calculating, because they know I remember and I am still reading. Still showing up, still silent, but never soft, you know something. They were right, I was not a good fit for their circle. I did not come to decorate the system. I came to understand it. And now that I do, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been told you were not the right kind? That you should stay in your lane? That maybe you should just let it go? If so, tell me, what was the moment you stopped trying to belong and started building something stronger? Drop it in the comments. Because the ones who are pushed out often see more than the ones who stay inside. And what you see might be the beginning of everything. I brought cookies. They brought a vote. That is how they do it here. Dismissal dressed as order, erasure hidden in process. It was a Thursday night, budget committee, the kind of meeting where people pretend to listen while deciding who no longer belongs. I took my usual seat, notebook in hand, tray of cookies on the side table. I did not bake to impress. I brought them because I still believed. That effort mattered. The board opened with pleasantries. Smiles stretched a little too wide. Thank you for your service. We appreciate your commitment. Moving forward with unity. Then, the motion. To remove Danielle Foster from the Budget Review Committee, effective immediately, no context. No discussion, just a seconded vote, and silence. I did not flinch. Because when you live long enough on the edge of inclusion, you stop expecting stability. They called it restructuring, said nothing personal. Just alignment, but I knew better. This was not structure. It was surgery, and I was the tissue they cut without anesthesia. I looked around. Some averted their eyes, some whispered behind their hands. One person smiled, the kind of smile that says, "You should have known this was coming." And maybe I did. Because I had asked too many questions. Questions that disrupted their comfort. Questions like, why does this vendor appear on 3 unrelated budgets? Who approved this line item without documentation? Questions that made people check their email twice before replying to mine. They did not want oversight, they wanted a stamp, and I brought a highlighter. So they voted, quiet, clean. Final, I stood, picked up my tray, tucked my notebook under my arm, and walked out. I did not turn back. Did not argue, did not ask why, because silence in that room was not defeat. It was distance, and outside that distance, I went home. Made tea, opened the bylaws again. Not out of anger, out of clarity, because if they were going to play by the rules, I needed to know the rules better than anyone. I read until midnight. Somewhere around section 8.1.3 I found it, a clause. Long, boring, overlooked. But there, a rule about premature removals, one that required notice and documented cause, which they never gave me. They had voted, but they had broken their own code, and that was the shift. I did not call a lawyer. I did not raise my voice at the next meeting. I did not send a fiery email. I printed that clause, folded it carefully, and placed it in the same folder where I kept every unanswered question I had ever asked, because I was not gone. I was collecting. People think silence means surrender, but silence is study, and sometimes, when they vote you out, they also vote you in, to the version of yourself that no longer waits to be accepted. Have you ever been voted out quietly, but unfairly? Leave a word in the comments, maybe not for them. For you, so you remember. That moment was not the end, it was the invitation. They smiled like they pitied me, but their eyes said, "You should disappear." Not with words, with looks. With tone. That was the new language of the neighborhood. After the vote, no one slammed a door. No one shouted, no one unfriended me, they just softened. Smiles grew smaller, waves got slower, the group chat moved without announcement. I was still in the loop, just never in time. Invitations got lost, events were already full, reminders were sent after the fact. It was not exclusion, it was erosion. Little by little, I faded from their frame. And the strangest part? It made things clearer, because fake warmth is colder than silence. You start to see the difference between people who mean well and people who mean control. The neighbor who always smiled too early stopped making eye contact. The one who used to bake pies now avoided the sidewalk when I passed. No one said I should leave. They just stopped acting like I should stay. And that kind of quiet, it speaks volumes. So I stopped waving first, stopped nodding out of habit, stopped shrinking myself to make others comfortable. I started observing who shows up early to meetings, who leaves with folders, who defers to whom. I stood in the back of every HOA session, arms crossed, eyes open. And I saw it, how leadership was built on habit, not merit, how power flowed toward the loudest, not the smartest. And while they smiled over sangria and sunset barbecues, I was at home reading minutes. Highlighting terms, mapping how votes passed when no one paid attention because exclusion clears the air. And in that space, truth walks in. They thought I was licking wounds. But I was charting structure, because power does not always live in the seat. Sometimes it lives in the silence watching the seat. I walked the block like I used to, but now I met eyes, held gaze, unflinching, no apology in my posture, no tilt in my smile. Because when people look at you like you do not belong, you stop asking permission to exist. And something shifted. Their allies got comfortable. got careless, started assuming I would never be in the room again. But the thing about assumptions, they do not see the moment just before impact. So I kept walking, past the curated hedges, past the dinner party glances, past the doors that no longer opened, and I asked myself, if their smiles were meant to push me out, what will they do when I walk back in? Smiling first. From the front, with the rules in my hand, and a seat no one can vote me out of. The rules were never meant to protect people like me, but they forgot one thing. I know how to read, not just skim. Not scroll, read, deep. Thorough. To the footnotes they assumed no one would notice. It began with a sentence, buried in a PDF, posted months ago on the HOA website. Something about proxy assignments, quorum redefinitions, transferable voting rights in the event of prolonged vacancy. It read like static, until I read it again and again. Then it clicked. The system wasn't strong, it was just old and unquestioned. It wasn't designed for challenge, it was designed for repetition. I started printing, highlighting, cross-referencing bylaw sections against state regulations. Within 2 weeks, my dining table had turned into a legal battlefield. Stacked reports, sticky notes, paper trails no one else had followed in years. I stopped watching TV, started watching patterns. Who signed without reading, who skipped meetings, who held unofficial authority, because no one had ever asked why. And I asked, silently. I discovered that 7 parcels in the community had inactive owners, people who had moved, passed, or defaulted. Yet those lots still held voting power, and under HOA Statute 3.6.2, that power could be reassigned by petition, with documentation. They never read that far, because when people feel safe, they stop securing the door. They thought control came from presence. Barbecues, sidewalk chats, inside jokes on text threads I was never added to. But real power, it lives in the architecture, in the things people assume no one will question. And I questioned everything. I kept a notebook, but not for feelings. For data, attendance records, motion approvals. Budget anomalies from 3 years back, and the deeper I read, the more I realized this wasn't about power, it was about assumption. They assumed no one would dig, that I would go away, that quiet meant gone. But quiet is study, and study becomes structure. Because when you know how a system is built, you know exactly where to press. I did not want chaos. I wanted clarity. And clarity? Clarity is what makes people nervous, when they no longer control the narrative. So while they poured wine and planned summer events, I sat under a desk lamp folding down corners of documents that hadn't been touched since 2012. And each corner, each clause, it told me something they never intended me to hear, that the fence around their authority had never been locked. And the key? It was literacy. Have you ever found truth where no one thought to look? Have you ever realized the game was rigged only because you actually read the rules? Drop your answer in the comments, because maybe the ones they voted out are the ones who were paying attention all along. They counted hands, I counted land. While they measured community by smiles and wine glasses, I studied the plat map. Not secret documents, public, ignored. Between their polished driveways and HOA pride were parcels left behind, unmowed, unclaimed. Unnoticed, but not valueless, because in this neighborhood, votes don't come from presence. They come from property, and forgotten land still speaks. If you know how to listen, I started with the county website, then the tax assessor, then probate court records, and what I found, dozens of lots still listed under names no one mentioned anymore, some passed down, some unpaid. Some simply abandoned, but all of them, alive in the ledger, and dormant votes can be revived if you read the fine print, if you follow the trail. If you move when no one's watching. I made a list, cross-checked addresses, made quiet calls. One man had inherited a strip of land he'd never seen, said it was useless. Said I could have it cheap, I bought it. Another was locked in foreclosure stasis. I filed, I waited, I paid the taxes. It became mine, quietly, no signs. No social media, just silence and signatures. By the end of that summer, I controlled 3 votes. Then 5, then 7, they still held meetings. Still assumed I had faded, but I had only shifted forms, because this wasn't about presence. It was about position, and position, it isn't earned through charm. It's earned through clauses. While they sent group texts about landscaping, I was reading parcel ID transfers. While they scheduled wine tastings, I was filing deeds. Because power doesn't always show up in a car. Sometimes it shows up by certified mail. And the thing about these votes, they didn't just give me leverage, they gave me thresholds, enough to trigger motions, enough to stall a board, enough to rewrite what they thought was unshakable. And still, they smiled at me like I was gone. But by the time they realized, the foundation had shifted, not with noise, with paper, because the land they laughed at was land that changed the count. And in every structure, counting is everything. Ever seen power sitting where no one thought to look? Ever claimed something small? That changed everything. Drop it in the comments. Let's talk about the votes that live in silence. They stopped watching. I started counting. In this place, silence is currency, and they thought I had gone bankrupt. After the vote, after the cookies, after the chairs scraped back and no one looked up, they assumed I had left, emotionally, socially, strategically. But I had not left, I had learned. Because when people think you are done, they stop guarding the gate, and that's when you step through it. I stopped waving first, stopped answering group messages, stopped explaining myself in rooms that already had their script. And with each shrug they gave me, I collected leverage, parcel by parcel, form by form, quiet signature by quiet signature. Until my name wasn't just on one line, it was on 3, then 5, then more. They still joked, still planned barbecues and birthdays, still assigned meaning to who sat where. But I sat where I wanted, in the back, near the edge, but never out. And one evening, at a budget review I was never supposed to return to, they called roll. Foster. Then again. Foster. And again. A pause. Their heads turned. Their whispers started, but it was too late, because those votes were legal. Stamped, sealed, filed. And silence, it had grown roots. They called it surrender. But it was strategy. I didn't need a seat at their table. I had mapped the legs beneath it. Because in any structure, the most dangerous person is not the loudest voice. It's the one with receipts. So I sat, listened, voted, no debate, no defense. Just precision. And as their confidence cracked, they searched for answers. But by then, I wasn't the question. I was the outcome. Have you ever gone quiet, on purpose, not to disappear, but to re-enter stronger? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear about the power you built while they weren't looking. Do you want justice or control? I said, both. It was not the glass and steel tower I had imagined. No grandiose lobby, just a small office. Worn carpet, fluorescent lights, and the faint scent of old paper. The woman behind the desk looked me in the eye. Not with sympathy, not with doubt, but with quiet confidence. Like she had seen it all before, and she already knew I would not back down. I slid the folder across the scratched wood table. Inside, parcel numbers, voting records, bylaws marked in highlighter yellow. She took her time, turning each page slowly, careful, methodical. Then she asked the question that had been running through my mind for weeks. Are you ready for this to get real? I nodded. Because until that moment, everything I had done had lived in shadows. Quiet research. Silent accumulation of power, invisible moves. Now it was time to step into the light. She explained the process carefully. Reinstatement procedures, filing paperwork, declaring candidacy. But it was more than just a seat on the HOA board. She said the word like it was a challenge. President. The seat no one ever thought someone like me would reach. The one reserved for insiders, for the polished, for the untouchable. But I was ready. This was not about revenge. Not about anger, it was about access. Access to transparency. Access to records, access to change, a platform to undo the tangled web they had spun. The barriers they had built to keep people like me out. We mapped the timeline, deadlines circled in red ink, forms printed and triple-checked, notices ready to send, but I told no one. Because power that seeks applause is power that fades. At the next community forum, I sat quietly in the second row, no notebooks, no trays of cookies, just silent observation. They debated landscaping budgets and pool maintenance. Someone made a joke about nosy neighbors who think they're lawyers now. Laughter. I smiled, because sometimes the most cutting jokes are the ones closest to the truth. 2 days later, I submitted my candidacy, certified stamped, posted on the community bulletin board, between a flyer for lost cats and an ad for piano lessons. No announcement, no fanfare. Just my name, Danielle Foster, candidate for HOA Board President. When a system built on assumptions is suddenly challenged by someone who knows the rules better, it hesitates. And in that hesitation, I stepped in, not with loud protests, not with dramatic speeches, but with proof, with clarity. Because I did not come asking for permission, I came armed with the law in one hand, and every ignored lot, every overlooked vote in the other. And now it was time. Time to see what happens when the person they dismissed begins rewriting the rules. Have you ever challenged a system that was never built for you? Tell me your story in the comments. Because sometimes the quietest moves make the loudest change. They whispered, "She cannot be serious." I was. The day of the HOA meeting arrived, the one everyone expected to be routine. Polite speeches, fake smiles, nods that said, "We are still in control," but I walked in differently. No fanfare, no fist raised, just steady steps. Calm breath, and the weight of every paper no one had dared to question. I took a seat near the front, closer than ever before, faces turned, shock, confusion. Avoidance, the chair called my name, the room fell silent. When I spoke, it was measured, precise, sharp. I challenged budgets, exposed discrepancies, uncovered layers of carelessness they had hoped would stay hidden. They tried to interrupt, to undermine, to dismiss. But the law was clear, the votes were counted, and the truth could not be silenced. For the first time, I was not the outsider, I was the voice. The votes I had quietly gathered were enough to shift the balance, enough to rewrite the rules. Their faces, when the gavel came to me, are etched in my memory. Not surprise, not fear, resentment. Because they knew this was only the beginning. I did not celebrate, no cheers. No speeches, just quiet satisfaction and a plan for what comes next. Power is not won through noise, it is won through strategy, and I had both. So when they whispered after, "Did you see her? She actually came back." I smiled, because I was not just back. I was here to stay. No one clapped, but no one voted against me either. The room held its breath. The silence pressed down harder than any applause could have. I sat in the new chair, the one they never thought I deserved. No fanfare, no announcements, just quiet acceptance. An unspoken admission that the old order had shifted. I looked around. Familiar faces. Some avoided my eyes, others barely masked their disbelief, but I did not need their approval. I only needed my own. I opened the agenda, spoke clearly, calmly, about transparency, fairness, respect. The board listened. Some nodded. Others stared. They understood quickly. I was no longer the outsider they could overlook. They had no choice but to follow. From that day forward, the meetings changed, the discussions deepened, the power shifted. I was not there to punish, but to restore balance, to bring order where there had been chaos. Quietly, I reviewed budgets, questioned expenses, held people accountable. Some resisted, some whispered behind closed doors, some tried to undermine. But I stood firm, unmoved, unshaken, because true power is not about loud victories, it is about steady influence. As I sat in that chair, I felt a quiet fire burning inside. Not anger, not bitterness, but purpose. They tried to write me out, but I wrote myself in, and that was more than enough. I opened the financial books, then I opened the windows. The first thing I did after taking the chair was to shine a harsh light on what they had tried so hard to keep hidden. I pulled out the budgets, the expense reports, the contracts signed behind closed doors. Money moving quietly through shadowed accounts. I laid them bare. Some board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others glanced at their watches, waiting for the meeting to end. A few whispered to each other, trying to downplay the numbers. But I stood steady, calm, unmoved, because facts do not care about feelings. I presented each line with precision, no accusations, no drama, just numbers. Slowly, the room changed. The smiles that once greeted me warmly now faded into wary glances. Nods became stiff. The air grew tense. Those who had ignored me before now watched my every move. I was no longer the quiet outsider. I was the one rewriting the narrative. With every report I shared, with every question I posed, I could see the fear grow. Not fear of me, but fear of what was being revealed. Because light exposes all. They tried to frame it as due diligence, as transparency, but I knew the truth. They feared losing control, losing the secrets they had buried. I remember one meeting in particular, when I asked about an unusually high contractor payment. One board member laughed nervously. Another avoided eye contact. A silence fell. Not the calm before a storm, but the quiet of a house where the foundation is cracking. That night, as I closed the meeting, I felt the full weight of what I had started. Leadership is not just about occupying a seat, it is about holding the truth, being willing to expose it. I was ready for the fight, not with anger, but with steady purpose. Because in the end, light is the most powerful weapon there is. Have you ever shined a light where no one else dared? What did you find? Share your story in the comments, because sometimes the quietest truth changes everything. They looked away. I let them. The meetings grew quieter, not because respect had filled the room, but because fear had settled in the silence. Those who once talked over me, who used to interrupt, dismiss, and talk down, now struggled to meet my eyes. Their voices faltered the moment I entered the room. Sentences trailed off. Conversations stopped mid-thought. They could not speak, not because I silenced them, but because they knew I was no longer the person to overlook, no longer the easy target, no longer the background noise. I carried my presence like armor, silent, steady, impenetrable. There was no need for me to raise my voice. The room spoke on its own. Empty chairs where allies once sat, whispers cutting off mid-sentence, the heavy weight of unspoken words pressing down. Attention so thick it could be sliced with a knife. I watched it all, not with triumph or bitterness, but with understanding. Because power is not always loud. Sometimes it is the quietness that shifts the balance. The quiet that unsettles. The quiet that makes people second-guess themselves. The quiet that forces others to fill the silence with noise. Only to realize the silence never left. I did not gloat, I did not mock, I did not seek revenge. I simply showed up, steady and calm, with a presence that needed no words, a presence that said more than any argument ever could. And that was enough. They were learning, the hard way, that I was here to stay, that I was not a fleeting shadow to be ignored or forgotten. And that silence, it was my choice, my weapon, my power, because sometimes the loudest message is spoken without a single word, and in that silence, I found strength. I found peace. I found the quiet fire that burns longer than anger. Have you ever felt your silence say more than any argument ever could? Leave your story in the comments, because sometimes the quietest truths change everything. Same street, same car, but I drive differently now. I still walk these sidewalks, passing by the same houses, the same neighbors, the same familiar corners. But I do it on my own terms now, no longer shrinking to fit their expectations, no longer bending to their silent rules. I walk with my head held high, knowing who I am and what I fought to become. They watch me. Quiet eyes peek through curtains, half-hidden glances that flicker and disappear the moment I meet them. Whispers stop mid-sentence when I walk by, but I do not watch back, because I have learned the power of distance. Distance as armor, distance as clarity. The strength that comes from presence without asking permission, respect without demanding it. My life here is no longer shaped by their approval. It is shaped by my choices, my will, my persistence. Every morning, I sit on the porch with my coffee, watching the sun rise over the quiet street. Evenings find me walking my dog, the familiar crunch of gravel underfoot a comforting rhythm. I tend to my garden in the late afternoon, quiet moments of peace in a world that once felt hostile. But beneath this calm surface, there is a quiet storm. A fire that burns steadily, unseen by those who once dismissed me. Because I know exactly what I fought for, what I earned. Not just a seat at the table, but the power to change the table itself. To rewrite the rules they thought were unbreakable. I see it in their eyes. The looks that linger longer now, the half-smiles that fade when I approach, the grudging nods that come with a flicker of respect. They are learning to accept me, not as the different one, not as the outsider they once whispered about, but as the one who changed the rules, the one who quietly became unstoppable. They pretend everything is the same, that life goes on as usual, but the ground beneath their feet has shifted. I carry myself with quiet confidence now. Not loud, not demanding, but unmistakable. A presence that commands attention without shouting for it, because power is not about noise, it is about persistence, about showing up day after day, steady, unyielding. In this neighborhood, I am no longer invisible, I am unavoidable. And that is a truth they will have to live with. Have you ever had to rebuild your life on your own terms? How did it feel to take control? Share your story in the comments, because sometimes the quietest shifts spark the loudest revolutions. I do not want an apology. I want their silence, and I already have it. Forgiveness is not what people think. It is not forgetting, not excusing, not pretending the pain never happened. Forgiveness is freedom. Freedom from the anger that drags heavy on your chest. Freedom from the endless need to prove yourself again. To fight battles that no longer matter. I forgave, not because they deserved it, but because I needed it. Because I could no longer carry their voices, their judgments, their doubts. Like chains wrapped tight around my neck, I needed to walk forward without glancing back, to stand tall without trembling in fear. When I stopped needing their approval, I found peace, not from their change of heart, they never changed, but from my own. They still talk, still gossip behind closed doors, still try to control what they cannot grasp. Still try to dim a light they cannot extinguish, but their words no longer reach me, because I have moved on. To something stronger, something quieter, something only I can hold. A life built on my terms, on my values, on my truth. That is the kind of forgiveness no one sees coming, because it is silent and it is powerful. I don't need them to say I'm sorry. I don't need them to admit they were wrong. I only need to be free, free from their expectations. Free from their whispers, free from the past that tried to break me. Forgiveness is the key. Not to them, but to myself. And that key unlocked a door. To a room filled with calm. With strength, with clarity. Sometimes the strongest revenge is not revenge at all. It is forgiveness. Have you ever forgiven, not for them, but for yourself? Share your story in the comments. Because some truths are meant to heal, not hurt. They called me difficult. I made it presidential. Labels. They try to pin you down, to cage you in a story that was never yours. I was the different one, the hard to work with, the problem no one wanted to deal with. But I learned something crucial. Labels only have power if you give them yours. So I took theirs, that heavy, ugly word, and I turned it into my badge. When I stood before the community as HOA President, that label was no longer a scar. It was a crown. I signed the first project that dismantled the very rules they had used to push me out. I changed policies, opened meetings to the public, gave voice to the ones who had been ignored for years. Every time someone whispered difficult, I smiled quietly inside, because I knew the title they feared was mine, and I wore it with quiet pride. There was no need to shout, no need to prove myself louder than the noise, because real power, it is owned in silence. It lives in steady hands, in calm decisions, in quiet revolutions. The boardroom became my stage, but I never played their game. Instead, I rewrote the rules with patience, with precision, with unwavering resolve, and every policy changed, every voice heard was a victory they never saw coming. Because power disguised in silence is the hardest to fight. And I was no longer the label they used to define me. I was the leader they never expected. And that was more than enough. Have you ever taken a label thrown at you and made it your own crown? Share your story below. Because sometimes, the quietest transformations are the most powerful. Have you ever been told you do not belong? That you are the wrong kind? That you should just disappear? That your voice does not matter? That your presence is a mistake? If so, where are you listening from right now? What time is it where you sit? Are you alone? Are you surrounded by noise? Are you hidden in plain sight? I want to hear your story, because every one of us, at some point, has been that silent fighter. Excluded, overlooked, dismissed. Underestimated, but stronger than they could ever imagine. The real question is, where are you now? Are you still watching from the sidelines, still gathering your strength, still planning in silence, still building your own rules, still waiting for the right moment to speak? Or have you already stepped into the room, claimed your seat, changed the game? Have you stood up silently while the world doubted? Have you held your ground when no one else would? Have you smiled inside, knowing this is just the beginning? You are not alone. Your story matters. So drop a comment below, share a moment, a feeling, a memory. Let us remind each other that silence is not surrender, it is strength. Power is not loud. It is steady, patient, unyielding. And sometimes, the greatest victories are the quietest. Remember that every moment you felt unseen, every time you swallowed your pain instead of shouting, every second you chose to build quietly, that is where your power grew, not in the noise, not in the spotlight, but in the moments when you thought no one was watching. Maybe you are listening now, on your lunch break, in your car, at the edge of a room that never made space for you. Maybe you are tired. Maybe you wonder if the fight is worth it. Maybe you ask yourself, when will it be my turn? Let me tell you something, it is coming. Not because the world suddenly notices, but because you have been building a foundation stronger than anyone else could see. That quiet fire inside you, it does not burn out. It grows. So when they laugh, when they doubt, when they push you aside, let them. Pour your coffee, open your lunch, sit at the table like it was made for you. Because maybe, just maybe, it was. And if you are still waiting, still wondering, still fighting, you are exactly where you need to be. Your story is not over, it is just beginning. And when you are ready, the world will hear you. Not because you shouted louder, but because your silence became impossible to ignore. So where are you in this story? Share your time. Share your place. Share what you carry that no one else sees. Your turn is coming. And when it does, make sure you are ready.